me check something here real quick. Forget where you put stuff. Okay, there we go. Okay, let me find my spot. Now, we pass these out. First, we're trying to get one to every family, so is there any family that has not received one of these? All right. There we go. Now, out of the ladies, Had you received one yet? And now, out of the wives, we have 3 extras. So, you want an extra one? You want an extra one? No? Yeah. I'll be making more. I'm going ahead and... You got one. What about... Do you want one?
I want one.
You want one? Okay. So, we also have somewhere in the list of the Cyber Cathedral, we also have a PDF. If anyone wants a PDF version, and if it's lost way down in there somewhere, maybe I'll just post the link again. So it'll be easier to find than trying to find it. So we began going through this, and that is our purpose here in the afternoons, is to go through this document, and so that's what we are endeavoring to do. So we have covered the first part. We're in Book 1, which is Founding Authority and Principles. Chapter 1 deals with the name of this particular church, and then Chapter 2 deals with the king and the head of the church. And so we have went through those 2 areas, and basically the first chapter is some legalities. The second chapter has to do with Christ being Lord over His church. And then Chapter 3 begins some preliminary principles. And, these preliminary principles here in this chapter are taking on some extreme significance in our day and time. Has anyone seen, I think the original full title was Stonewall, the Free Speech Apocalypse. The latter part of the Free Speech Apocalypse is the name that I think it most generally is referred to as now. Okay? Who has seen it? Who has not seen it? Okay. That is something that we need to make available for everyone to see. It is very important along several lines. It ties into this chapter, as a matter of fact. Has anyone ever heard of Jordan Peterson? Dr. Jordan Peterson. He is a professor from the University of Toronto. And he is dealing with these same issues. Now, he is you can define him in a lot of different ways. Here's how I define him. Okay? Because secularist really doesn't quite work. Humanist really doesn't quite work. But how I would define him is a Jeffersonian. So basically he would be a Jeffersonian type humanist, which has some theistic implications involved in it, but it is more humanist than theistic. But anyway, he deals with this very important topic as well, because in Canada, they are being forced to use certain pronouns. So if I came up to you and said, well, I prefer to be referred to as Z, or Zer, or whatever weird concoction of terms that you can come up with, that if you would not use those pronouns to define that person, it could land you a fine or even jail time. And so anyway, this professor came out and said that he's not going to use those words in a lot more colorful language. But he has said that he absolutely is not going to abide by that. And so he became a YouTube sensation and has been engaged in this topic of free speech. And what is happening is that people who have traditionally been some of our enemies have now become very sympathetic, because what happens is when any group of people become oppressed, they become allies. Yep. And so he has become, even though he is not a Christian, he is very sympathetic to Christians and understanding now some of the things that they have been saying for many years. And so, anyway, it's opening up an evangelistic opportunity. As we deal with modernists and Enlightenment people, because the postmodernists, everyone's against them. Because postmodernism is against everyone. And they want to silence everybody. And so even the Enlightenment people and the modernists have sought to make some new friendships with Christians. And so anyway, it gives us an evangelistic opportunity. But it also gives us the opportunity to attempt to give a proper understanding of this issue. Now, our forefathers, there was no way that the Constitution of the United States was going to get ratified without the Bill of Rights. The Constitution was dead. And so the only way that it was going to get ratified was if they included the 10 Bill of Rights. And if you notice in the 10 Bill of Rights, the very first one is freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And then the second one is the right to keep and bear arms. Now the reason why those are number 1 and number 2 is because you're not going to have any rights without both of those two. You have to have both of them in order for you to possess any rights. And so that's why they are 1 and 2. Well, this issue is coming back to the forefront again, and of course it's going to give the church an opportunity to lead. But there's a problem. The American church is not ready to lead on this issue or any other issue. But the opportunity is there. I also believe that this issue is going to become the biggest one. If things keep progressing the way that they are, it's going to become the top issue. Okay, now we can talk about a lot of different issues, and all issues are important. But the biggest one, and the biggest fight that is brewing right now, and that is coming to a head, is going to be over free speech. And without freedom of speech, you can forget the abortion issue, you can forget fighting pornography, homosexuality, you can forget any issue that is out there, because without the freedom of speech, you will not have the opportunity. You'll have one opportunity. And then once you use up that one opportunity, then you can start a jail ministry. And so that's the way it's going to go. If some things don't change, and if the church does not lead in this battle. So we have an opportunity, not only it evangelistically, but we also have an opportunity to address this issue and to establish the criteria and the facts that surround it. Well, in the American Reformed churches, most of them took on this issue from the very beginning. Now, what happened is that there was a European tendency for more of a state church or a church state. That was the tendency. Now, there are several reasons for that. Most of Europe was ruled by monarchies. If you live in a monarchian type of system, it is going to favor a church state, or better, in that situation, a state church. You have in England, even back after the Reformation and so forth, what do you have? You have the what? Church of England. What was all the fighting going on about? Well, the other groups wanted their rights to exist too. But they had a state church. And who was the head of the church? The king. Well, a lot of Europe had those tendencies. Well, here in America, we were, as you've seen, Reformed theology and Calvinism starting to, after a lot of application, and the implications of those things being applied across the board and working out the details, we began advocating for Republican government, a constitutional representative government. And so within that came forth the issue of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and the Reformed churches in America were leading the charge on this issue. Now, one of the sad things that happened was that freedom of speech was turned on its head and used by our enemies in the 1960s and 70s to actually destroy the freedom of speech and a lot of other freedoms as well. By first of all redefining it. It wasn't the freedom of speech, it was the freedom to do whatever you wanted to do. And there's a difference. And so they redefined it and basically turned it upside down and used it for their own propaganda purposes. But, the church at that time had been weakened to the point that there was no way that it could address that issue or to recapture it. One of the things that we find in the Reformed churches in early America, and especially amongst the Presbyterians, was what we find here in chapter 3 in our document. It is taken from that. Okay, so this is not something new. The topic concerning freedom of speech was actually a very fundamental part of Reformed American theology. And so, we're going to begin going through this issue, and it is very important that we get this issue nailed down, and it's very important that we get prepared in order to not only try to defend it, but also to use it evangelistically in order to reach our people with the truth. So we're going to begin under chapter 3, preliminary principles, number 1. Reformed Church of the Holy Trinity, in presenting to the Christian public the system of union and the form of government and discipline which they have adopted, have thought proper to state, by way of introduction, a few of the general principles by which they have been governed in the formation of the plan. This, it is hoped, will, in some measure, prevent those rash misconstructions. these are things we are dealing with today as well. Not only was they dealing with them back in the 1700s, because believe me, our European brethren had a lot of misunderstanding on what we were saying and what we were attempting to do, so much so that England tried to prevent it. We had to go to war with them. So we are going to face a lot of rash misconstructions of what we are saying. And so we need to learn to be clear and precise when it comes to this issue so that we can attempt to prevent these things. So first is those rash misconstructions and dishonest reflections, which usually proceed from an imperfect view of any subject, as well as make the several parts of the system plain and the whole perspicuous and fully understood. They are unanimously of opinion. So, a bunch of fancy language, finally we get down to letter A. And these are the actual principles. So let's deal with the first one. That God alone is Lord of the conscience. You've heard this statement many times, especially if you come from a more evangelical background. Liberty of conscience. Nowadays, it gets termed a lot of different ways. Some people have termed it, and I hate this one, soul liberty. I hate that term. That is just weird. Soul liberty. You know, I don't know if it's an R&B disco show or what it is. Soul liberty. Or maybe some kind of food from the South. But if it's dealing with, if they're referring to it in the aspect of the soul of man, soul liberty, the only true aspect of soul liberty is, of course, would be found in regeneration. But anyway, God alone is Lord of the conscience. This is a very important thing for us to understand. What do we mean by liberty of conscience? Because some people will use this. You've heard Quakers, Amish types, Mennonites, and every culty group under the sun try to grab onto this liberty of conscience. As a matter of fact, even though our forefathers set up a constitutional republic, and let me rephrase that, they set up a Christian constitutional republic, but let me rephrase that. They set up a reformed constitutional republic. Even though that's what they did, people have used this topic and this term in order to tear it down. And because they have so misdefined this liberty of conscience, it is used for every abomination under the sun. David Koresh wants 25 wives, up, liberty of conscience. Yeah. Larry Flint wants to print smut, liberty of conscience. Every abomination over the last many years has used some form of the First Amendment in order to accomplish their evil deeds. When the First Amendment has not anything to do with those things. You see, the background concerning the First Amendment was this. Our forefathers came over here from Europe because everyone in Europe couldn't keep from oppressing each other. And so, Reformed Europe was oppressing each other with an occasional fight with the Muslims and an occasional fight with the Roman Catholics and an occasional fight with some form of paganism. But it got to the point to where Reformed brethren were persecuting each other. Everybody wanted a Presbyterian state, and then others wanted a Baptist state, and others wanted an Anglican state. And you had all these different groups wanting power for their own denomination. And whenever they did get into power, they would be oppressed. Then they would call for unity. And then as soon as they got into power, they would oppress those who finally let them into the club. It was a nightmare. So our forefathers wanted to come to a new land, to establish a place where they could worship God. They understood the Scriptures. And so that's what they did. So several different colonies were formed. You had Presbyterian colonies. You had Anglican colonies. You had Baptist colonies. Congregationalist colonies. All these different colonies that were established. Why? So that they could live in peace and worship God as they believed the Scriptures taught. So eventually, they were unified in their resistance against the tyranny of Great Britain, who wanted to subject them all under their authority. And so, how are they going to get along? I mean, think of this. You have all these different colonies with different denominations in charge. And their history is that they've never been able to get along. How are they going to do it? Well, it was from that where this doctrine and these principles of freedom of worship, freedom of speech, liberty of conscience developed. Now, here's what they were saying. They were not saying that every pagan group in the world had a right to practice and to promote their religion through the state. What they were saying was, in most places, now, believe it or not, though, there were some colonies that became states that actually held on to state religions for a long time. Massachusetts didn't get rid of their state religion until 1832. A long time after the Constitution was ratified. But their purpose wasn't so much their concern over state religion, it was a federal denomination to be forced upon them that they were worried about. And so what they did in the First Amendment is they chained the federal government down so that the federal government could not come into their state and tell them which church they had to attend. They did not want a national religion in the form of a state church. They did have, a religion in the broadest sense. It was Christian. But the federal government had zero power in relation to that topic at all. And that's the way the states wanted it to be. They did not want the federal government to have any say-so. They believed should have all be left to the states. And so it was out of those things and out of those battles that these doctrines arose. Because you got to remember, in the Anglican Virginia, there were all kinds of Baptists who were imprisoned. In the colonies, there were all kinds of Baptists, and even Presbyterians had a difficult time with them Anglicans, because they was carrying over the mindset from the old homeland over there in Europe. And so these principles developed in order to have a nation that was Christian, but it didn't have a national church. In other words, where all Protestant denominations could live together in peace and harmony and worship in the church that they believe conformed to the Scriptures. Our forefathers did not set up the First Amendment or develop the liberty of conscience for Islam. They did not develop the liberty of conscience and freedom of worship for Wiccans. They developed it for Protestant Christians. And the proof is in the state constitutions. So you have the state constitutions and the federal constitution. In the federal constitution, the state said, hey, we're not going to agree to that federal constitution until you put that First Amendment in there that says Congress cannot impose their church upon us. But in the state constitutions, every one of them had something similar to like South Carolina's state constitution that said to hold office in the state of South Carolina, you had to be a professing Christian, a Protestant who believed in the inspiration of the Old and the New Testament. There is no doubt whatsoever that this was set up and designed for Protestants to be able to live together. Now, that did not mean that we did not exercise grace and that we did not exercise civility to non-Protestants, because we did. But what it meant was this, is that our form of government was set up upon a Christian and Protestant and Reformed understanding of the Scriptures. And what we were trying to protect was all these non-Christian influences to be able to come in and use the state to advance their propaganda. So, let's read what it states here concerning a proper understanding of these terms. This was, if I remember right, this was actually issued in the Presbyterian Constitution in 1769, if my memory serves me correctly, but I could be off with the dates. It's kind of like history, it might be a few years off. But anyway, first, that God alone is Lord of the conscience and hath left it free from the doctrines and commandments of men. What is liberty of conscience really then to protect? It's to protect other men from imposing their will on other men when it's not from God. We are free from the doctrines and commandments of men. Now this ought to remind us of a passage of Scripture, Mark chapter 7. It ought to remind us of Jesus as he confronted the Pharisees. And he said that they had perverted the Word of God with the doctrines and commandments of men. They had made God's law void by their own doctrines and commandments. And so, liberty of conscience is that we are free from those things. This is what gets us in trouble. Like, for instance, the prohibitionists, as we were talking about earlier. When people try to impose their doctrines on other people, it doesn't come from God, it comes from men. That is why the Word of God and our understanding of it and sola scriptura is so important. Because we must know what doctrines and commandments come from God so that we can distinguish them from what comes from men, so that we can tell those that come from men, we will not consent. Because we are free from the doctrines and commandments of men. And so, what are these doctrines and commandments of men? Which are in anything contrary to his word or beside it, in matters of faith or worship. So, first of all, let's deal with this with the aspect of liberty of conscience in matters of faith and worship. Notice, when it comes to faith and worship, and we'll talk more about this later, and by the way, to our forefathers, that meant every area of life, by the way. Any matter of faith and worship, that was their life. But anyway, notice that this faith and worship, or faith or worship, is anything that is contrary to the Word of God. This is the reason why it was designed in our nation that we was going to settle these disputes by heeding to Peter and having a reasonable defense of our faith. In Europe, they would shoot each other, stab each other, slice each other up in order to settle which was the right understanding and what should be practiced in faith and worship. But here, there was this focus upon being able to prove it from the Word of God. So, therefore, they consider the rights of private judgment in all matters that respect religion as universal and unalienable.